The wrestling world has been shaken to its very foundations by a tragedy that feels less like an isolated incident and more like the devastating climax of a story that has been building for decades. As Ric Flair, the Nature Boy, the 16-time world champion, the man who made arenas echo with the word "woo," collapsed without warning at a private wrestling convention in California, bringing an electric, nostalgic crowd to a standstill as joy turned into panic, the noise of cheers replaced by screams and the thud of his body hitting the cold concrete floor. There was no script, no storyline, no safe landing, only the sight of one of wrestling's greatest icons gripping his chest, stumbling backward, and going limp, his body finally rebelling after years of punishment, and while security and medics worked with lightning speed to reach him. Across the state, WWE's chief content officer Triple H was in the middle of a SummerSlam press briefing in Hollywood when he received the call that made his face drain of color, prompting him to abandon everything: media obligations, PR schedules, the corporate facade. Bursting from the room with his shirt half-buttoned and his phone pressed tight to his ear as he stormed into a black SUV and sped towards Cedars-Sinai Medical Center. Not as an executive but as a man in a desperate race to be at the side of a mentor, a brother in arms, and a man who had shaped his career and life. But while the urgency of the moment was clear, the underlying cause of Flair's collapse was darker and more complex than anyone wanted to admit, because according to close insiders, Flair had been living in constant, unspoken agony for months, suffering from spinal compression, nerve damage, and even internal bleeding, yet refusing to rest or step away from the spotlight because, in his own immortal words, the show must go on, a stubborn defiance that saw him just a week earlier on a podcast confidently declaring, "I still got one more match in me," sending fans into a frenzy over the thought of one last Nature Boy performance, only for him to collapse backstage moments after the recording, brushing it off and refusing hospital care with the kind of grit that made him a legend but also perhaps doomed him to this moment. The San Jose Legends of Wrestling event was meant to be another victory lap, with children grinning in awe and older fans basking in nostalgia as Flair laughed, posed for photos, and even delivered a soft "woo" before fate struck in the cruelest way possible, cutting him down mid-conversation with a fan, leaving him sprawled and unresponsive as medics worked frantically, reportedly losing his pulse in the ambulance and flatlining for 6 excruciating minutes before being resuscitated, his life hanging by a thread. Inside Cedars-Sinai, doctors placed him in a medically induced coma as Charlotte Flair rushed in tear-streaked, joined by waves of calls and visits from Becky Lynch, Cody Rhodes, Roman Reigns, and countless others, while Triple H planted himself in the ICU and refused to leave, canceling all appearances and media duties. His vigil a wordless testament that for him this was more than business. It was family. Yet as word leaked, a furious undercurrent began to ripple when hospital insiders revealed that Flair's collapse might have been avoided if he had followed medical advice to avoid air travel, prolonged standing, and high altitudes, advice he allegedly ignored after WWE insisted on his appearance at the convention under contractual legacy obligations, a corporate phrase that, if true, will forever be stained with the accusation that the company risked a man's life for the sake of tradition and profit, and that is why fans have flooded social media with outrage, using hashtags like #PrayForFlair and #NatureBoyForever not just as prayers but as rallying cries demanding accountability, because Ric Flair bled for WWE, literally. And if corporate pressure played any role in pushing him toward this moment, the truth must come out. For Triple H, the weight of that truth is unbearable, and as he sits in the sterile hallway of Cedars-Sinai receiving calls from Shawn Michaels, Randy Orton, John Cena, and others, he knows this is no random collapse but the inevitable outcome of an industry that glorifies pushing its heroes beyond the breaking point. Memories of Flair's near-fatal organ failure in 2017 still haunting him as proof that the warnings had been ignored, and in that moment, his role shifts from executive to avenger, his mind racing not just with concern but with suspicion as whispers begin to circulate that Flair had been planning to reveal long-buried secrets from 2 decades ago. Secrets involving Vince McMahon, Brock Lesnar, and a covered-up WWE tour disaster in South America, an incident thought erased from history but for which Flair had kept a receipt, in the form of an incriminating tape that has now mysteriously disappeared. The timing of that disappearance and his collapse is too perfect to dismiss, pushing Triple H onto a collision course with Brock Lesnar in a tense, private confrontation at Lesnar's isolated Saskatchewan ranch where Brock, in his typically blunt style, denies involvement but cryptically suggests Hunter ask Roman about the tribal secret, a clue that sends WWE's internal security into overdrive until they uncover the chilling fact that Flair's final phone call before collapsing was to Roman Reigns, a call Roman erased from his logs hours later, and though Paul Heyman insists Flair was warning Roman, not threatening him, Hunter's distrust deepens, leading him to convene a closed-door, media-free locker room meeting where he lays down an ultimatum. Anyone protecting the truth about what happened has 48 hours to come forward before he burns this whole company down, a statement that leaves even veterans like Randy Orton and AJ Styles in stunned silence while CM Punk throws gasoline on the fire with a tweet reading, "Legends don't collapse, they're pushed, now." As Flair's unconscious body lies hooked to machines, Triple H is quietly reactivating the WWE Legacy division, a shadow operation once used by Vince McMahon to bury scandals, but this time it will be used to expose them, signaling a war inside WWE's walls that could forever change how the company treats its legends or plunge it into its most explosive scandal yet, because one way or another, Triple H has decided the truth will come out, and if Ric Flair wakes up, the wrestling world may never be the same again, but if he doesn't, this fight will become the most personal crusade in WWE history, a reckoning that will force every fan, every wrestler, and every executive to confront the cost of their so-called legacy. The wrestling world has been rocked to its core by an emotional and shocking turn of events that has left fans, wrestlers, and insiders holding their breath as the legendary Nature Boy Ric Flair fights for his life after collapsing at a private wrestling convention in California, an incident that unfolded without warning, without theatrics, and without the safety net of kayfabe, as the man who carried 16 world championships and decades of wrestling history in his battered body suddenly stumbled, clutched his chest, and hit the cold concrete floor in front of stunned fans whose cheers turned to screams, prompting security to rush in and paramedics to arrive within 90 seconds while somewhere across town, WE's chief content officer Triple H was at a SummerSlam media briefing before abruptly abandoning everything. Storming out with his shirt half-buttoned, eyes bloodshot, and phone pressed to his ear as he sped to the hospital in a black SUV, not as an executive, but as a man rushing to the side of a friend, mentor, and father figure. The moment was raw, unfiltered, and deeply personal, shaking the entire wrestling community that now grapples not just with fear for Flair's health but with the grim reality that decades of brutal chair shots, suplexes, blading matches, and grueling schedules may have finally pushed one of wrestling's most enduring warriors to his breaking point, especially as insider whispers reveal that Flair has secretly been enduring spinal compression, nerve damage, and even internal bleeding for months while refusing rest or retirement because, in his own words, the show must go on, a stubborn defiance that saw him just last week on a podcast declaring, "I still got one more match in me," only to collapse backstage afterward and refuse hospital care, brushing it off with a trademark grin. But at the San Jose Legends of Wrestling signing event, where fans were ecstatic, children hugged him, and he still managed a faint. Woo! His body finally betrayed him mid-conversation, sending him to the floor unresponsive, and though paramedics worked quickly, reports say he flatlined in the ambulance before being resuscitated after 6 harrowing minutes and rushed to Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in critical condition, where he was placed in a medically induced coma as Charlotte Flair arrived in tears. Fellow stars like Becky Lynch, Cody Rhodes, and Roman Reigns reached out, and Triple H never left his side, canceling appearances and media duties. His presence in the ICU a silent declaration that this was more than business. Yet in the shadow of this crisis, anger bruises. Leaked hospital reports suggest Flair's collapse might have been preventable if he had followed doctors' advice to avoid air travel, prolonged standing, and high altitudes, advice allegedly ignored after WWE pressed him to attend the convention under contractual legacy obligations, a corporate decision that, if proven true, will ignite a storm of accountability because for everything Flair gave, his blood, his body, his youth, the idea that his life might have been risked for a photo op is enraging fans and legends alike. And as Triple H sits in that sterile hallway receiving calls from Shawn Michaels, Randy Orton, John Cena, and more, he is not only grieving but stewing on the bigger picture. This collapse was not random, it was the latest and most severe symptom of a system that chews up its icons and returns them broken. And with memories of Flair's near-fatal 2017 organ failure still fresh, Hunter knows this could have been avoided. Behind closed doors, WWE higher-ups scramble under a gag order to contain information, but social media refuses silence. #Pray for Flair and #Nature Boy forever dominating timelines, while Triple H, now more cerebral assassin than corporate executive, shifts into a mode of relentless determination, vowing to find out if this was truly just fate or if something more sinister was at play, a suspicion that grows when an anonymous insider known as Spartan 6 Inches hints Flair had been preparing to reveal buried secrets from 2 decades ago involving Vince McMahon, Brock Lesnar, and a covered-up international incident from a WWE South America tour, a scandal once thought destroyed but for which Flair had kept receipts, in the form of a tape that has now mysteriously vanished, its disappearance coinciding suspiciously with his collapse. This lead sends Triple H to Brock Lesnar's remote Saskatchewan ranch in a tense, private confrontation where Brock denies involvement but cryptically advises Hunter to ask Roman about the tribal secret, a clue that sends WWE's internal security digging until they uncover that Flair's final call before collapsing was to Roman Reigns in Pensacola, a call Roman erased from his logs just hours later. And though Paul Heyman insists Flair was warning Roman about something, not threatening him, Hunter smells deeper rot, calling a mandatory, media-free locker room meeting to issue an ultimatum. Anyone protecting the truth about what happened has 48 hours to come forward before he burns this whole company down, a declaration that leaves even veterans stunned while CM Punk fans the flames with a tweet reading, "Legends don't collapse. They're pushed." Now, as Flair remains unconscious, Triple H begins reactivating the long-defunct WWE Legacy division, originally Vince's secret cleanup crew, but this time with the mission of exposing rather than burying the truth, signaling a war inside WWE's walls that could either lead to long-overdue reform in how legends are treated or plunge the company into its most dangerous scandal in history. With one fact already clear, if Ric Flair wakes up, his story may change everything, and if he doesn't, the fight for his truth has only just begun.